The repair bay aboard the Astrian flagship Stellaris hummed with energy that made Jake Reeves' teeth ache. Everything about the alien vessel seemed designed to remind humans that they were guests in someone else's superior technology, from the bioluminescent panels that pulsed like living heartbeats to the gravity systems that felt just slightly wrong beneath his feet. "Captain Reeves," announced the melodious voice of the ship's AI, "Queen Zephyra awaits you in Workshop 7. Please proceed directly and avoid touching any unmarked surfaces." Jake shouldered his toolkit and tried not to think about how many ways this assignment could go catastrophically wrong. Maintaining alien technology was tricky enough without that technology being bonded to the nervous system of the galaxy's most formidable warrior queen. Workshop 7 turned out to be a crystalline chamber that looked more like a medical suite than a repair facility. Diagnostic displays floated in mid-air, showing readouts in flowing Astrian script that hurt to look at directly. In the center of it all stood Queen Zephyr herself, motionless as a statue and twice as intimidating. "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully, offering what he hoped was an appropriately respectful bow. Zephyra turned her attention to him with the focused intensity of a targeting computer acquiring a lock. She was tall even by Astrian standards, her elongated ears marked with the ritual scars that denoted her royal lineage. The armor she wore seemed to flow like liquid metal across her form, following contours that suggested both protection and deadly grace. "Captain," she replied, her accent turning the familiar word into something musical and slightly dangerous. "I am told you have experience with biomechanical integration systems." "Some," Jake admitted, setting down his toolkit. "Though I'll be honest, nothing as sophisticated as this. Your armor's integration with your nervous system is beyond anything human technology has achieved." "Indeed." Zephyra's expression suggested she was still deciding whether his honesty was refreshing or simply proof of human inadequacy. "The armor bonds with our neural pathways during the maturation ceremony. It becomes part of us, responding to thought and emotion as naturally as breathing." Jake nodded, trying not to stare at the way bioluminescent patterns flowed beneath the armor's surface like visible thoughts. "Which makes repairs complicated." "Precisely. My technicians cannot work on the armor while it remains bonded to me, and disconnection during combat damage risks neural feedback that could prove fatal." She gestured toward a section of armor along her left side where scorch marks and microfractures spoke of recent battle damage. "Thus, I find myself requiring the assistance of someone whose nervous system is incompatible with our technology. Because if something goes wrong, I'm the only one who won't be fried by feedback," Jake translated. Bluntly stated, but accurate. Zephyra moved to a diagnostic platform that rose from the floor like a flowering crystal. "Your task is to repair and recalibrate the damaged systems while I maintain conscious control over the armor's responses." Jake unpacked his tools, noting how they looked primitive compared to the elegant technology surrounding them. "I'll need you to walk me through the interface protocols. And I should warn you, this kind of work requires physical contact with the armor's external sensors." "I am aware." Zephyra's voice carried a note of something that might have been apprehension. "I have reviewed your service record, Captain. Your reputation for precision and discretion precedes you." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. The Queen had done her homework, which meant she knew about his reputation for treating alien technology with respect rather than trying to reverse engineer it for human advantage. It also meant she'd probably read the classified reports about his previous diplomatic assignments. "I'll be as careful as possible," he promised, approaching the diagnostic platform. "And I'll explain everything I'm doing before I do it." Zephyra nodded, settling onto the platform with fluid grace. This close, Jake could see the individual neural interface points where the armor connected to her skin, small crystalline nodes that pulsed with soft light along her neck, wrists, and what he assumed were various other points beneath the armor. "The damaged section is here," she said, indicating the scorch marks along her side. The impact disrupted 3 primary neural pathways and caused microfractures in the biomechanical matrix. Jake activated his scanners, studying the readouts with growing respect for Astrian engineering. "This is incredible. The armor's not just worn, it's grown. Like a second skin that thinks. An apt description. Zephyra watched him work with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential threat. The armor learns our patterns, anticipates our needs, responds to our emotions. Over time, the bond becomes so complete that the line between warrior and weapon disappears entirely. Jake began his preliminary assessment, his instruments painting detailed pictures of damage that went far deeper than surface appearance suggested. This was going to require him to access systems that were essentially part of the Queen's body, touching interfaces that controlled everything from life support to emotional regulation. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "this is going to be more intimate than either of us probably expected." Zephyra's elongated ears flickered with colors he was learning to associate with complex emotions. "Captain, I have led armies into battle and negotiated treaties that shaped the fate of star systems. I believe I can manage the discomfort of necessary maintenance." Jake nodded, but as he prepared his tools for the delicate work ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that both of them were about to discover new definitions of discomfort, and possibly several other things neither of them had planned for. Jake's first touch to the armor's surface sent a shiver through the diagnostic readings that he felt more than saw. Zephyra's intake of breath was barely audible, but in the crystalline chamber it seemed to echo like a confession. "Neural feedback," she explained quickly, her voice carrying just a hint of strain. "The armor interprets external contact as potential threats. I must consciously override its defensive protocols." "Should I?" Jake began, pulling his hands back. "No." Zephyra's response was immediate. "Continue. I will adapt." Jake resumed his work, using microscopic manipulators to access the damaged neural pathways. Each tool contact required Zephyra to actively suppress her armor's instinctive responses, creating a strange partnership where her mental control enabled his physical repairs. "Fascinating," Jake murmured, watching bioluminescent patterns flow through the armor's surface as it responded to his tools. "The microcircuitry is grown rather than manufactured. Each pathway is unique to your nervous system. The armor begins its growth during our adolescence," Zephyra explained, her voice more relaxed now as she found her rhythm in controlling the feedback. "It learns our bodies, our minds, our dreams. By maturity, it knows us better than we know ourselves." Jake paused in his work, struck by the implications. "That's incredibly intimate. You're essentially sharing consciousness with a living machine. Is that so different from how humans bond with their technology?" Zephyra asked, and Jake caught something that might have been amusement in her tone. "I have observed human pilots who claim their ships have personalities. Engineers who insist their computers develop preferences." "Fair point," Jake admitted, resuming his delicate manipulation of the neural interfaces. "Though we don't usually have our technology reading our emotions and vital signs in real time." "No," Zephyra agreed, "but perhaps you should. The armor's emotional monitoring prevents many forms of combat stress and tactical errors. It knows when I am angry, when I am afraid, when I am." She paused, experiencing other states that might affect my judgment. Jake's hand stilled for a moment as he processed the implications of that statement. The armor was reading Zephyra's emotional state right now, which meant it was aware of whatever she was feeling about their current situation. "Is it reporting anything I should know about?" he asked carefully. Zephyra's elongated ears flickered through several color patterns in rapid succession. "The armor notes elevated stress indicators consistent with unfamiliar circumstances." Jake nodded, trying to keep his focus on the technical aspects of his work rather than the growing awareness that every tool contact was essentially touching the Queen herself. The neural interfaces were so sensitive that his adjustment sent feedback through her entire nervous system. "There," he said, sealing a repaired pathway. "That's the first section complete. The armor should show improved response in the left lateral systems." Zephyra moved experimentally, and Jake watched in fascination as the armor flowed with her motion like liquid metal. "Remarkable. The feedback lag has decreased significantly. The microfractures were creating signal delays, Jake explained, already moving to the next damaged section. Like trying to send messages through static. This next area required him to work closer to her torso, where the armor's life support systems integrated with her cardiovascular functions. Jake found his hands working near the curve of her ribs, his tools sending readings directly to systems that monitored her heartbeat. "Captain," Zephyra said softly, "you should know that the armor's diagnostic mode provides very detailed feedback. I am aware of every adjustment you make." Jake paused, his hands hovering over the interface points. "Aware how?" "Like pressure, or like touch," she admitted, her voice carrying a note of vulnerability he hadn't heard before. "The armor translates external contact into neural signals. Your work feels like someone carefully examining my body with extraordinary attention to detail." Jake felt heat flood his face. "I should have asked more questions about the sensory feedback. If this is inappropriate." "The repairs are necessary," Zephyra interrupted, but her voice was gentler now. "And your approach is, surprisingly considerate. Most maintenance is performed rapidly, with little attention to comfort. This is different." Jake resumed his work with new awareness of what his careful, methodical approach meant from her perspective. Each precise adjustment, each moment spent ensuring optimal calibration, was being felt as intimate attention rather than mere technical competence. "The next section will require access to the central processing hub," he said, consulting his diagnostic readings. Near my heart," Zephyra finished quietly. "Yes. The armor's core systems monitor all vital functions. That area is particularly sensitive." Jake looked up to meet her eyes, seeing something there that made his chest tighten with anticipation and concern in equal measure. "Are you sure you want me to continue?" Zephyra's smile carried depths he was only beginning to understand. "Captain, I have never been more certain of anything in my life." The central processing hub required Jake to work with an intimacy that made the previous repairs seem casual by comparison. The neural interfaces clustered around Zephyra's heart were the armor's most sensitive systems, monitoring not just vital signs but emotional states, stress responses, and what the diagnostic readouts euphemistically labeled as comprehensive physiological data. "I'll need to access the primary coupling matrix," Jake said, his voice quieter than he'd intended. "It's right here." His fingers traced the edge of an interface panel just below her collarbone, and Zephyra's sharp intake of breath made the armor's bioluminescent patterns flare in response. "The feedback is more intense in this area," she explained, her usual commanding tone replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "The armor's emotional regulation systems are highly responsive." Jake could see that in the diagnostic displays floating around them. Every movement of his hands created cascades of data as the armor interpreted his touch, translated it into sensory feedback, and fed that information directly into Zephyra's nervous system. "Should I work faster?" he asked, concerned about the sustained impact of the neural feedback. "No." Zephyra's response was immediate. "The careful approach is preferable. When armor maintenance is performed in haste, the sensory feedback is chaotic, unpleasant. Your method is significantly more tolerable." Jake nodded, but he was beginning to suspect that tolerable was a significant understatement. The diagnostic readings showed elevated biorhythms that suggested Zephyra was experiencing something considerably more complex than mere tolerance. He opened the primary interface panel, revealing the crystalline heart of the armor's consciousness, a network of biomechanical pathways that pulsed in perfect synchronization with Zephyra's heartbeat. Working here meant touching systems that controlled her emotional regulation, her stress responses, her most intimate physiological functions. "This is remarkable," Jake murmured, using micromanipulators to adjust connections that controlled the armor's empathic feedback systems. "The integration is so complete that the armor essentially shares your consciousness." "In some ways, yes," Zephyra agreed, her voice carrying a breathy quality that made Jake acutely aware of how his work was affecting her. The armor learns our emotional patterns, anticipates our needs, responds to thoughts we haven't yet formed into conscious decisions. Jake paused in his work as the implications hit him. Which means it's currently monitoring your responses to this entire situation. Yes, Zephyra admitted, her elongated ears flushing with colors that seemed to indicate embarrassment mixed with something else entirely. The armor is recording very detailed data about this maintenance session. What kind of data? Jake asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew. Zephyra was quiet for a moment, and Jake could see internal displays flickering as she accessed the armor's readings. Elevated heart rate, increased neural activity in areas associated with positive emotional response. Heightened sensitivity to external stimuli. The armor is interpreting this maintenance as. She paused, as an intimate encounter rather than a technical procedure. Jake felt his own heart rate spike at that admission. And what do you think it is? I think, Zephyra said softly, that the armor's interpretation may be more accurate than either of us initially realized. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he resumed work on the central coupling matrix, acutely aware that every careful adjustment was sending waves of sensation through systems designed to monitor and enhance the most intimate aspects of Zephyra's experience. There's damage to the emotional regulation pathway, he observed, studying readouts that painted an unexpectedly complex picture. But it's not from the recent battle. This looks like accumulated stress fractures from chronic emotional suppression. Zephyra's silence spoke volumes. Your Majesty, Jake said gently, how long has it been since someone took care of you? Really took care of you, rather than just maintaining your equipment? I am a queen, Zephyra replied, but her voice carried a note of something that sounded almost like longing. Care is not, it is not something I typically receive. Jake's hands stilled over the damaged pathways, understanding flooding through him. The armor had been monitoring years of suppressed needs, unacknowledged desires, the accumulated cost of always being strong, always being in control, always putting duty before personal connection. The repairs to this system will require more than technical adjustment, he said carefully. The armor needs to recalibrate its emotional baseline. It needs to learn what healthy emotional response feels like. And how, Zephyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper, do you propose to teach it that? Jake met her eyes, seeing vulnerability there that no crown or armor could conceal. By showing it what care actually feels like. By taking the time to do this right, with attention and respect and genuine concern for your well-being. The armor's diagnostic displays flared with activity as Jake resumed his work, but now his movements carried conscious intent beyond mere repair. Each adjustment was performed with the understanding that he was touching not just technology, but the woman beneath it, someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for rather than simply served. Captain, Zephyra breathed, her voice carrying emotions that the armor was undoubtedly recording in exquisite detail. Yes, Your Majesty. I think you should continue to the central core systems. The ones nearest to. She paused, the ones that require the most careful attention. Jake nodded, his hands moving toward the armor's most sensitive interfaces with the understanding that he was crossing a threshold that would change everything between them. The central core systems were located where Jake had known they would be, integrated into the armor's monitoring of Zephyra's cardiovascular functions, requiring him to work directly over her heart. The neural interfaces here were so sensitive that his diagnostic tools registered feedback from her pulse, her breathing, even the subtle electromagnetic patterns of her thoughts. This is the deepest integration point, Zephyra explained, her voice carrying a tremor she couldn't quite suppress. The armor's core consciousness interfaces directly with my autonomic nervous system here. It monitors everything. Jake positioned his hands carefully over the interface panel, acutely aware that his work here would send feedback through every system in the armor. I'll be as gentle as possible, but the recalibration process will require sustained contact with the neural pathways. I understand, Zephyra whispered, then added with something that might have been humor, though you should know that gentle is not something my armor is accustomed to interpreting. Jake began the delicate process of accessing the core systems, his fingers working with microscopic precision while diagnostic displays showed him exactly how every touch registered in Zephyra's nervous system. The armor's emotional monitoring systems painted cascading patterns of response that spoke of sensations no crown or royal protocol had prepared her for. "The damage here is more extensive than I initially thought," Jake observed, studying readouts that revealed stress patterns accumulated over years of command decisions and emotional suppression. "Your armor has been trying to compensate for chronic emotional strain. It's essentially been working overtime to keep you functional while you ignored your own needs." "Duty requires certain sacrifices," Zephyr replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Duty requires you to be effective," Jake corrected gently, his hands working to repair pathways that controlled the armor's response to comfort, pleasure, and emotional connection. "And you can't be truly effective if you're running on emotional reserves that have been depleted for years." His fingers brushed against a particularly sensitive interface junction, and Zephyr's sharp intake of breath made the armor's bioluminescent patterns flare like aurora displays. "Careful," she whispered, her voice low and almost amused despite the breathiness that betrayed her body's response. "That part's sensitive." Jake paused, meeting her eyes with an understanding that passed between them like an electric current. The double meaning in her words hung in the crystalline air of the workshop, acknowledging both the technical reality of the armor's neural feedback and the emotional reality of what his careful attention meant to someone who had been starved of genuine care. "The armor or?" Jake began, his voice trailing off as he saw the answer in her expression. "Both," Zephira admitted, her royal composure giving way to something infinitely more vulnerable and real. "The armor translates your touch into sensations I had forgotten were possible. But more than that, the attention you're giving to my well-being rather than just my functionality, it's affecting more than just the technology." Jake resumed his work with conscious awareness that he was recalibrating more than just the armor systems. Each careful adjustment taught the biomechanical consciousness new baselines for emotional response, showed it what healthy intimacy looked like, demonstrated that strength and vulnerability could coexist. "There," he said softly, sealing the final interface connection. "The core systems are fully repaired and recalibrated. The armor should respond more efficiently to your emotional needs rather than just suppressing them." Zephira moved experimentally, and Jake watched in fascination as the armor flowed with her motion more smoothly than before, its bioluminescent patterns now displaying complex harmonies rather than the rigid control sequences he'd observed earlier. "The difference is remarkable," she said, then turned to face him fully. "But I suspect the armor is not the only thing that has been recalibrated during this maintenance session." Jake nodded, understanding that their relationship had fundamentally changed through the intimate necessity of the repair process. "Your Majesty." "Zephira," she corrected softly. "After what we have shared, I think we have moved beyond purely formal address." "Zephira," Jake repeated, liking the way her name felt on his lips. "What happens now?" She smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, the expression carried no trace of royal duty or diplomatic calculation. "Now, Captain, we discover what it means to build something that goes beyond political alliance. The armor has learned new definitions of care and intimacy. Perhaps it is time for its wearer to explore those definitions as well." Jake felt the weight of possibility settling around them like the armor's responsive embrace. "And the repair schedule?" "I believe," Zephira said with a smile that promised both challenge and invitation, "that regular maintenance will be required. Very careful, very thorough maintenance. Perhaps we should establish a routine schedule for equipment calibration." As the workshop systems powered down around them, Jake realized that his assignment to maintain alien technology had become something far more complex and wonderful, a chance to explore what happened when two people from different worlds discovered that the most sophisticated technology in the galaxy couldn't replicate the simple power of genuine care and attention. The armor might have been repaired, but what had begun between them was just starting to grow.